Hello again. Welcome to Tiny Desk Sermon. It's good to be back with you after a week off. Today I'm looking at the text for this coming Sunday, which in the lectionary calendar is Christ the King, or Reign of Christ. It's also in our extended Advent season, the second Sunday in our Advent observance. These lessons always work very well under the theme of an extended Advent season, because they're actually very similar to the readings that come at the beginning of Advent, where they look to the future reign of Christ and the hope that we have for that to come. So it's a very smooth transition to do it this way. The readings for this coming Sunday include a part of Luke's crucifixion scene, which is a curious thing to read on this Sunday, but we'll see why it's there in a minute. Just want to mention how the Jeremiah text speaks to the problem of bad kings and the hope for a righteous king. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep. The leaders, the kings, the rulers are failing to do their job. And so it's God's work then to gather up the people under God's rule, and then bring about a new ruler or leader, a shepherd, who will care for them, because the shepherd's job is to protect and care for. So the ending, the days are surely coming when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. That's the job of a king, to deal wisely, to execute justice and righteousness. And so Jeremiah has this great sort of promise that will come to pass. And it should not be forgotten that that promise comes in the midst of a terrible period of exile and of the nation losing its status because the leaders have failed so miserably. All right, let me go then to Luke. I see a couple folks out there. Glad you're joining me live. Let me know what you think. So Luke 23, this is the crucifixion scene. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, This is the King of the Jews. One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." All right, a lot of really impactful verses and scenes in this text that kind of have stuck with people over the centuries. One is verse 34, which, if you can see, the way it is printed in the text has a double bracket surrounding it, or at least the first half of verse 34. They do that because there's some scholarly questioning about whether that verse was part of the original Gospel of Luke. It is not found in the earliest known manuscripts of Luke. Of course, we don't have the original. We have no originals of writings of the New Testament. We have copies of copies of copies. So the earliest known copies don't have that verse. And then a little bit later, that verse appears. So the question is, was that there and then quickly got taken out by a scribe or skipped or something and then got brought back in? Or was it not there in the original Luke and got added later for various reasons? Scholars dispute that. There's a lot of questions about which way that could go, and that's fine. But this verse is so beloved and so much a part of the sense of this scene of crucifixion in Luke, and this is only in Luke. It's best to keep it in. One way to do that is put the double brackets on it, but you don't have to do that even. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Jesus there being mocked as king, as Messiah, on a cross, which is not where anybody expected a Messiah to reign from. And in his embodiment of his messianic nature, he's pronouncing forgiveness on the people because they are ignorant of what's really going on. So it's a pretty profound verse. You'll see that the word saved, or saves, or versions of that, salvation, appear throughout this text, as they do in other parts of Luke's gospel. It's a very prominent theme. And here, the way it's used is save yourself. He saved others. He should save himself. It would prove to us that he is who he says he is, or who others say he is. Even the one of the criminals, the one who's the antagonist here, save yourself and us. Sort of a selfish thing to say save yourself, because he really wants it for his own benefit. So it's worth pondering again what this word save or salvation refers to. It has a variety of meanings, but it often is something much richer than the sort of the common religious understanding of save, as in are you saved, or to be a saved Christian, which is sort of a simplistic notion that, well, if you have accepted Jesus into your heart, then when you die, you go to the good place instead of the bad place. It's really not at the heart of what this word is about. So salvation is, by the way, if you look at the word salvation, you see in it the root of the word salve, S-A-L-V-E. A salve is something you put on a wound to help it heal. So the heart of the word salvation, or save, is healing and restoration. Restoration from a state of disease or danger to health and wholeness and safety. So the question then is, how do we ponder that in Jesus God restores from disease and danger a life of health and wholeness and safety? And what do those mean? So that's That's a lot to ponder there, but that's what's going on in these verses. And of course, the irony is he can't be the Messiah he is and practice self-interest. That would be an anathema to the nature of his reign as Messiah. And of course, you remember that none of the expected characteristics of Messiah are what we see in Jesus, unless you totally redefine them first. So that's a lot of what's going on here. So then we get the one criminal derides Jesus in sort of a self-interested, save yourself, save us. And then the other one rebukes him, says, don't you fear God? We're getting what we deserve. We know what we did. But this one is innocent. Jesus is innocent. And so he should see, have a different understanding of what's happening here. And then he says this, again, much beloved verse, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. So what do we take that verse to mean? Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Well, this is why I am subtitling this, the kingdom is not a place. So we could hear this in other verses as, Jesus, when you get to that place that you reign over, and you're in that place, remember me, include me. Don't forget me, because I was guilty and rejected and crucified. But please remember me when you get there and include me. And Jesus says, truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. Paradise is a word that comes from other cultures other than Jewish or Greek stuff. And it has to be basically a very vibrant green hunting ground where there's plenty of animals and trees and whatever to live off of. A very verdant place, life-giving place. So when Jesus says, truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise, again, we tend to hear that as, okay, you're going to die today and you're going to be with me immediately there. But today in Luke's gospel has a much different sense to it. Just like in chapter 4 of Luke, where Jesus reads part of Isaiah and says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the poor and set free the captives and those wonderful things. And then he says, today this text has been fulfilled in your hearing. He didn't mean it that day. Everything was done. Today in Luke's gospel means this moment of beginning the reign of God that Jesus is inaugurating. So in this new era where a different power is at work, that's what today means. So we don't have to get caught up on the today meaning one day or whatever. It means kind of from this point forward, because now we're in a new day, we're in a new age, we're in a new era. But still, it's a promise of really wonderful good news that that this criminal will not be forgotten, and he will be included. So that that leads us into what is the nature of the reign of Christ, the reign of God, the ruling power, the governance of God. And that's where you get at where I emphasize again that the kingdom is not a place, it's an activity. It's a way of God acting. And it's a way of inviting us into a way of acting. The kingdom is not a place, it's an activity. But in the context of this crucifixion scene, we are seeing another kingdom, a different empire at work, an empire of power and domination. So the contrast is meant to be extreme, to clarify what this reigning power of God is about, what the kingdom is. And I would say, to use some alliterations, it's not about conflict, it's not about control, and it's not about coercion, but it is about compassion. the reason that one reason that the crucifixion scene is so powerful, especially the way Luke tells it, is you have Jesus crucified, and on either side of him you have these other guilty men suffering. But even if they're guilty, they're suffering a horrible, torturous punishment inflicted by an empire of power and domination. And Jesus is right in the middle of it. So the power of the image of the cross is the power of seeing God's compassion for humanity. It's not an accident that throughout history, marginalized, oppressed, poor communities of faith have made a lot of the image of Jesus suffering on the cross. For a lot of sort of middle-class, comfortable Protestantism, that's a very uncomfortable image. Or even maybe in Catholicism it can be too. But in churches where it's the poor, oppressed, marginalized, suffering, struggling people, there's no more powerful image than Jesus suffering on the cross, because that suffering of Jesus is the compassion of God with humanity, and especially with those who are suffering injustice being perpetrated upon them. So if the kingdom is not a place, it's an activity, we see that activity enacted in acts of compassion. So to say that Jesus reigns over the world is not about domination, control, winning the world for Christ, forcing people to become Christian, and that's been too long the history of the church. It is to see in acts of compassion, wherever they may be, to see God at work, to see the truth of Christ at work. And that means also being willing to see that outside of what we might call the church doing its stuff. The church's job is to enact the compassion of Christ, certainly. But it's also the job sometimes for the church to point to the compassion of Christ when it's happening elsewhere in the world and say, that's it too. Because it isn't only Christians who are able to live out the truth of who God is. And sometimes our job is to say, yes, that's it, and we're with you in that. And we are united in our sort of costly love that we're living for one another. So we are in a what I call, we're in our extended Advent season. So we've added on 2 Sundays prior to the traditional 4 Sundays. An extended Advent in general is a time of focusing on what we hope for in God and for our world, and then how do we wait for that, and how do we live for that while we wait. And I think this text really draws us into that theme, that we are living the Jesus way as people of faith, and the reality of the world as it is now, which is a mess, but with the hope of that reign of Christ to come. So our calling is to live this way of the gentle rule of Jesus, we might say, both as an expression of our faith, as a witness to others of what it's all about, but also to kind of shore up hope as a powerful way to live in this life in which we're not there yet, but we trust that we will get there. That's why I love the season of Advent, the bringing together of a profound hope and a discipline of waiting, and that the discipline of waiting means living for the very thing we hope for. It's a great understanding of Christian faith. any time of year. Well, hope you can join us for our Sunday liturgy, whether in person or on live stream. We have transformed our space into Advent blue with a lot of beautiful things and ways to pray and be engaged in the liturgy, which are a little different from other times of year. So it's wonderful to share that with you. And then hope to see you next week on Tiny Desk, and then we'll celebrate Thanksgiving however we do, and we'll continue right on with Advent 1. Thank you for joining me. Hope to see you again soon. Peace.